Okay, before we start, how many contentions do you have for pre-flow purposes?
We have 2 contentions, 2 subpoints on each contention.
Okay.
How about you guys?
2 contentions, 2 subpoints on the first contention.
Okay.
Okay. So obviously there are no judge preferences, but we'll just time ourselves and keep ourselves reliable. Is it okay if we stand, or do you want to just sit?
You can stand if you want.
I don't know. So are my opponents ready?
Just give me 1 second.
Yep, no worries.
Okay. We'll put ourselves on mute.
Just let me know if the audio goes in and out at any time so I can restart speaking.
Okay.
Okay. My opponent's ready? Is my partner ready? Okay, then I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. My partner and I stand in firm affirmation of the resolution resolved. On balance, societies benefit from religious belief and practice. Before proposing our case, we'll provide the following definitions to clarify this debate. On balance, after considering the power influence of both sides of the question by Cambridge Dictionary, society is an enduring and cooperating social group whose members have developed organized patterns of relationship through interaction with one another, from Merriam-Webster. Religion, a particular system of belief in a god or gods and the activities that are connected with this system, from Collins Dictionary. Moving on, contention 1. Effects on daily life, productivity, and mental health. To begin, religious beliefs and practice are beneficial to society because they have a major aspect of how daily life can impact mental health. Subpoint A, mental health. A 2015 exam review examining over 3,000 scholarly articles for the International Journal of Emergency Mental Health and Human Resilience, which found a positive effect of religion/spirituality on a variety of health outcomes, including depression, faster recovery from depressive episodes, lower rates of suicide, less use and abuse of substance and substance dependence, greater well-being, and self-reported happiness. The consequences of just one of these many examples, meaning depression, is enough to falter society in a major way. From the National Library of Medicine, 2011, depression impairs cognitive and social functioning, leading to decreased performance in the workplace and elsewhere. This dysfunction has considerable economic impact on the individual, his or her family, his or her employer, and on society at large. Depression, especially marital depression, maternal depression, affects the health and development of children with possible long-term consequences for the mental health of future generations. As of now, 20% of all adults suffer with depression, at least in the United States. Finding a way to cope with something that affects all of society is another important benefit of religion. Professor Al-Faksir, professor at Sierra's University, states, research has shown that religious beliefs and practices can help people to cope with difficult situations such as physical illness, stress, and depression. Individuals who use religious coping appear to handle their conditions more effectively than those who do not. Healing and premeditating a way to protect yourself and others in difficult situations is fundamental in order for people to get through the hardest times and come out better for it. Without healthy people often created by religion, societies can create a greater well-being in many ways shown by the previous data, mentally, economically, and for future generations. Subpoint B, human rights progress. Religion has been a great factor in progressing human rights and protest movements with peaceful tactics. From former United States Ambassador David Saperstein in 2013, interfaith protests often focus attention on peaceful forms of resistance to oppression and injustice. Think of the religious denunciation of the practice of apartheid and segregation as sins, or religious efforts to halt ethnic cleansing and defer. Religion was crucial in these places in order for reform to happen, since churches will use their power and influence in society to create peace and justice from the morals they have learned as an effect of religion. Contention 2, peace/safe societies in war times. On balance, religious beliefs and practices are beneficial to society as they are a major contributor to peace building and in conflict prevention. From R. Scott Appleby, professor at Notre Dame, 2004, religious actors and faith-based organizations are now present at every stage of the conflict transformation cycle. They work in peace education and conflict prevention, in mediation and conflict resolution, in interreligious dialogue, in building networks of local leaders for peace, in post-settlement social reconstruction, and trauma work, and in the activities and courts where human rights, including religious freedoms, are given theoretical depth and cross-cultural grounding. Organizations such as these, from the morals and lessons religion has taught them, organizations have these effects from the morals and lessons religion has taught them to promote peace and aid. Furthermore, as societies are in crucial points in time, such as wartime, religion is always there in order to provide safety and reassurance to people seeking help. The Peace Building Initiative in 2007 states religious institutions often survive wars or state collapse when other social and government structures break down. Faith networks, churches, temples, and mosques are often the first to begin picking up the pieces after violence and will remain as parts of community long after humanitarian workers and international aid have moved on. In trying times in life, many social aids will fall, whether it's organizations or the family around you. However, the church and religion will also continue. For these reasons and many more, I urge a vote in the affirmation.
Are my opponents ready? I will start on my first word. So. My partner and I stand in firm negation of the following resolution. Resolved, on balance, societies benefit from religious beliefs and practices. We have definitions on hand and will provide them when necessary. Contention 1, discrimination and hate. Subpoint 1, homophobia. Religious scriptures actively discourage and look down upon homosexuality. People use verses from various religious texts to justify hate and crimes and discrimination. The Bible verse, "You shall not lie with a male as with a woman," is an abomination. When interpreted literally, such verses can be used to rationalize homophobic beliefs, are then used to justify hate and discrimination against the members of the LGBTQ+ community. The discrimination can lead to a decline in the mental health of members among this community, as individuals can be faced with great levels of hatred and disapproval. Members of the LGBTQ+ community are thus at higher risk to experience many mental health problems due to discrimination. For example, according to Jeremy Gibbs, who researches relationships between psychological stressors, mental health, and substance use, states, LGBT persons who mature in a religious community context report experience increased discrimination and internalized homophobia. LGBT young adults are at disproportionate risk for experiencing distress and abuse. A recent meta-analysis by Friedman in 2011 found that LGBT young adolescents report higher rates of abuse, victimization, and bullying than their heterosexual peers. LGBT young adults also report higher rates of mental illness, end quote. Because of the belief systems of many religions disapprove of and look down upon homosexuality, people use their prejudice against their LGBTQ community to discriminate and perpetuate hate against them, and leading to negative impacts I previously shared. Subpoint 2, inequality. Discrimination and unequal treatment on the bias of religious beliefs and practices is not unique to a single group. In fact, there are many examples of religions religions being used to justify inequality actions and policies. In fact, quote, with increased frequency, we are seeing individuals and institutions claiming a right to discriminate based on religious objections. The discrimination takes place in many forms, including the following: religiously affiliated schools firing women because they become pregnant while not married, business owners refusing to provide insurance coverages for contraception for their employees, graduate students training to be social workers refusing to counsel gay people, pharmacies turning away women seeking to fill birth control prescriptions, bridal salons, photo studios, and reception halls closing their doors to same-sex couples planning their weddings, end quote. Michael 2016. People use their religious beliefs and value system to justify hate and discrimination. Bob Jones University rigid interpretation of the Bible led to racial discrimination. Women who have been unjustly treated due to religious beliefs and practices, similarly to the use of religious texts to vindicate prejudices against the LGBTQ community. Timothy 2:12 is the 12th verse of the second chapter of the first epilepsy to Timothy. It is often quoted using the King James translation, but I suffer not with the women to teach, nor to usurp authority over the man, but to be in silence. Historically, such verses have been used to ground the ideology that justifies legal inequality for women and to exclude women from secular leadership roles as well. Women are discriminated against directly due to religious beliefs and activities, leading to inequality throughout the world. Contention 2, religious wars. Subpoint 1, the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre. It was a wave mob of violence that killed directly because of the Huguenots by the Catholic majority. The massacre killed more than 10,000 people over a time period of 2 months. In 1572, society was directly killed because of religious beliefs. Quote, Catholic persons, possibly urged on by militant priests, soon joined in on the slaughter. Mobs began targeting the Huguenot neighbors, trying to force them to renounce their hearsay and murdering them when they refused. As news of the killing spread across in Paris, so did the violence. From late August to October, Catholics rose up and launched massacres, killing the Huguenots. End quote. Religion has directly targeted the people of France and spread through 12 different countries. Subpoint 2, the Crusades. Another example of wars caused by religious beliefs were the Crusades. The great series of Western holy wars where the Crusades was lasted from 1095 until 1291 BC. The aim was to capture the sacred places in the Holy Land from the Muslims who lived there. The first crusade was started by Pope Urban II in 1095. He raged at the capture of the holy places and the treatment given to the Christians and ordered a war. He said that the war would have the support of God. The Pope also absolved all who took part in the crusade of all their sins. The residents of the city were brutalized and slaughtered by Christian invaders, and the invaders' conduct breached the principles of modern just war ethics, end quote. This extreme war was caused by religion and had the support of God. In the Crusades, 1.7 million were killed. For these reasons, I see no other ballot than that of the negation.
Is everybody ready for cross-examination?
Yeah.
And then during this cross-ex, we both can ask questions, right?
Yes.
Okay, do you mind if I have the first question if everybody's ready?
No problem. Just let me get
It's always off, first question.
Oh, okay. Cool. Is everybody ready?
Yes.
Then I will begin starting now. So is that verse, the verse that you talked about where man shall not lay with man, hasn't that come out that it's been translated incorrectly and it's actually a man should not lay with child?
Although it has been translated incorrectly and they have found that, it is the belief and the use of this verse to justify the practices.
Can I have a follow-up question really quick?
Yes.
So is it the religion's fault that it was translated incorrectly? And is it like the religious beliefs fault that it was translated incorrectly? Or is it the translation's fault?
And human error.
Yeah.
You can fault human error, but the human error that leads to this belief is what leads to the perpetuation of discrimination. It's used,
But it wasn't a religious cause.
I mean, the belief is used by the people who use this belief, it is with religious intent. They use it as a religious justification.
Okay, you can have the next question.
Okay, what was I going to say? So, do you have any evidence that religious people are less depressed than everybody else, the non-religious?
Yeah, I actually bring that up in our case, and it says that, sorry, Oh, I also.
Oh, from the International Journal of Emergency Mental Health and Human Resilience in 2015, a study of over 3,000 scholarly articles found that religion or spirituality it had a positive effect. So it decreased depression, it made people recover faster from depressive episodes, had lower rates of suicide, less abuse and substance dependence, greater well-being, and self-reported happiness. So the people who are religious or who are spiritual are more likely than people who are not to experience less depression and other issues like that.
And I also have another quote directly comparing to a secular study versus religion. So now for our question, my question was that phrase not just from a Christianity viewpoint, and aren't we talking about all religions, so it's not very prevalent in this debate? Or the quote that was talking about homosexuality?
Talk about on balance. So this means with all things considered, meaning every religion that we bring up during round should be considered by this definition. And yes, it may be from one religion, but it's used throughout multiple different religions.
Do you have evidence for that?
Bible, yes.
Can you name the religions?
I know that in the Quran, there's verses that I don't have a specific example, but there are verses that refer to the fact that women should be subservient to their husbands.
I'd like to see those verses and if they're actually viable. Your question.
Okay, so you mentioned in your second subpoint in your first contention, or no, your
Sorry, really quick, that is time. So I feel like
that was pretty much on the basis. So if you want to continue that question, you can, but if not, I think it's okay.
So you said that there are physical illnesses in your first subpoint. Do you have any examples of the physical illnesses?
I brought up anxiety and depression,
which have physical consequences.
And substance abuse, and also maternal depression, all things that could affect our future and societies.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll probably use some of our prep.
Yeah, we're gonna take a little bit of prep time. Starting right now. Yeah, so I took 50 seconds of prep time and then I'll just take that off.
Okay.
Probably like 2 minutes and 10 seconds of prep time, okay? Yeah, cool. Is everybody ready? Just to go down the flow, I'm first going to be talking about their 2 subpoints under their first contention, then I'll be talking about their war contention. Okay, starting now. So on the homophobia subpoint, it talks about how it looks down on sexuality and that there's bigger problems associated with religious belief and practice, more specifically regarding homophobic discrimination. But currently there are LGBTQ progress in legislature and things like that, and just overall in society. So in the status quo, this discrimination that they're talking about may be happening a little bit, but it may not be, it's not happening as much as it used to happen, more like in the 1950s and earlier, where it was seen as sinful or stuff like that. I mean, clearly there are issues within LGBT, there's LGBT problems right now, but it's not impacting us in the status quo. And so the religious belief and practice can be overcome by protests and stuff like that. The same thing goes for inequality around women. They talked about how they fired women because they were pregnant and not married, and that there is female exclusion in the workplace. But since the Voting Act has been passed in the past about allowing women to vote, female suffrage has increased and feminism has increased over like over periods of time. And so progress is still happening despite the fact that these religious beliefs even if they do go against this and promote discrimination, there are ways to overcome it. And so it's not necessarily preventing societal benefits, which means that there are two subpoints fall. And since it's not happening in the status quo, then it doesn't really apply under the resolution, and the subpoints fall. Moving on to the next contention, which is war. They talked about the St. Bartholomew Massacre, which happened in 1572, and the Crusades that happened in 1095 to 1291. Like before, it's not happening in the status quo, and they haven't provided any modern day examples of issues. And so if we're talking about society, we should be talking about society now. We shouldn't be talking about society in the past. We should be talking about society now, because we're focusing on the resolution talks about societal progress in the status quo. And so again, no matter what, also I wanted to talk about the fact that no matter what, there is going to be conflict, despite the fact if we do have religion or not. For example, if religion was eradicated and there was no religion, there would still be major issues and major discrimination issues, and also just inherent human conflict. I have a quote from the Science Direct Journal. It says, "Productivity in religious orders and management by values of oh, that's my bad. By Earlham, he's in counselingdirectory.org/uk. It says, "Conflict, or the propensity for conflict, is part of the makeup of human beings. Whether we develop or form associations with others, we are entering into a relationship where choices and decisions have to be made." Basically, what this card is saying is that no matter what, even if there wasn't religion, or if religion wasn't the basis for these wars, like the St. Bartholomew Massacre or the Crusades, there would still be huge amounts of conflict in the world. And that conflict is just an internal part of human nature. And so their argument that war is started by religion is not a valid argument in this debate, considering the fact that conflict will happen no matter what. And then I also wanted to I asked a question about the man and man religious quote that they provided from the King James Bible. They talked about how they agreed with the fact that the verse is translated incorrectly, and they also agree with the fact that it can be deemed up as human error as the reason why homophobia exists today. But they also said that it's used as a religious, they use the quote to back up their homophobia, but this does not mean that religious practice is the one that's upholding this homophobia. It means that the translation error and the human error are the ones that are upholding this homophobia. If the verse was translated correctly, guaranteed there would be less homophobia, because a lot of people use this specific verse to back up their homophobia. They also talked about how we should value every religion brought up in the debate, but I disagree with this. I believe we should be talking about every religion overall. Since the resolution talks about how on balance religion benefits society, we should be talking about all religion overall, not just religion brought up in the debate. And if they don't provide enough examples of how overall religion does not promote benefits in society, then they lose the debate. Just going over what I talked about before, the first two subpoints about discrimination, there's current progress being put in place for females, for feminism and LGBT progress, which means that we can overcome these issues that are inherent in religion, which means that it's not causing issues in the status quo. And then also on the wars matter, those wars are not specifically happening right now. And since they have not provided any status quo examples of when wars are happening, then we can assume that these wars are all in the past. Now, if they were to bring up a point like this, then we would have to attack it, but they haven't yet. For these reasons and many more, or for these reasons, there are two contentions and their subpoints on both contentions fall, and I strongly urge a vote on the side of the affirmation.
Okay, it was 4 minutes.
Oh, is it 4 minutes?
I'm sorry, we took an extra minute based on miscommunication, so can the second speech now just be 5 minutes, and we'll allow you the time for 5 minutes? Sorry.
Yeah.
It's usually 4 minutes, but we just had a little bit of miscommunication with the format.
You can disregard the overall.
Or yeah, you
part,
can
because
disregard.
I just kind of took the last minute to go over all what I said in the speech.
Yeah, so we can still have the same rules, just take
That's
out
okay.
what we said because of miscommunication.
Yeah, okay. So I think we're gonna take some prep time right now, and I will start that now. Okay, so we used 1 minute and 11 seconds of prep. I'll just write that down. If you don't mind, I'm just gonna stay seated. And did they do like a brief off-time roadmap map? Is that a thing in BQ? Okay, so firstly, what I will be doing is addressing my opponent's attacks on my case. Then I will be going over my opponent's contentions, and if I have time, I will be reaffirming my own case. Okay, and sorry, let me pull up the timer. All right, so I will begin now. The first attack on my case that I would like to address was the Bible verse that we quoted, and the fact that you said, because it's human error, we can't attribute it to religious belief. But the problem is that because of this portrayal, people use this verse as the basis of their beliefs and as the rationale for persecuting and exhibiting violence against LGBTQ+ persons. And then I would like to go over the not impacting us in the status quo as it relates to LGBTQ+ persons. We are still seeing heavy impacts due to discrimination against them. A very recent example would be the passage of the Don't Say Gay bill. So while you can say that there is no current issues or that we are not faced with as much discrimination as before, we are now taking steps in the opposite direction with such acts. I also have an example of how it continues to impact women in the status quo. In 2018, there was a former teacher at a private Catholic school in central Pennsylvania who was fired for being pregnant and unmarried. So while you have claimed that we don't address any of the status quo, there are examples of remaining impacts. And as for the no current conflicts point, while we didn't provide any current examples, I could provide a more recent one, which would be the Rwandan genocide. And with the Rwandan genocide, the Berkeley Center found that the church not only failed to protect human life, but witnessed its murders playing an active role in the killing of the Tutsi people. And the Rwandan genocide occurred in 1994. I will now be moving on to my opponent's contentions. In their first contention, in their first subpoint, they talk about mental health, but there's still issues with declining mental health. As we mentioned in our own case, the LGBTQ+ community has seen a decline in mental health because they are parts of a religious community. Another thing that negatively impacts mental health is religious trauma, which has been found in 2021 to impact millions of individuals every year. Religion can easily be weaponized and sayings can be twisted to fit the agenda of the messenger. Shame, guilt, and condemnation can be among many of the harmful messages communicated, which can lead to lasting and deep mental health wounds and damage to the psyche. Moving on to their second subpoint, where they speak about religious efforts to halt ethnic cleansing. We've seen time and time again religion being used to justify ethnic cleansing and genocide, and we provided the examples of the Crusades and St. Bartholomew's metaphor, and now we've brought in the Rwandan genocide. Moving on to their second contention about conflict prevention, we have again shown that conflict is facilitated by religion. And I have a piece of evidence from Swarthmore College that says that religion facilitates war. It becomes potent when mixed with nationalism that then can become indistinguishable and now appear as the dominant force of our day. And while religion is not the sole cause of war, it does play a major role in facilitating conflict. And now to reaffirm my own contentions with what time we have left. Moving back to the LGBTQ+ community, as I stated before, our mental health continues to be negatively impacted, and the Don't Say Gay bill and other measures have been found to as current examples in the status quo of continued discrimination. And subpoint B, which was, actually, that's time. I think I have to stop. All right.
Sorry.
Are you guys ready
You got
for cross-sex?
Yes.
Do you have the first question?
You got it.
Okay, okay, then cross-sex is starting now. So about the Don't Say Gay bill, isn't the Don't Say Gay bill specifically about all sexualities, not just LGBTQ sexualities?
Yes, but it's more damaging for members of the LGBTQ plus community because being LGBTQ is currently not considered, I guess, the status quo when you compare it to being straight. So having to disclose that is more damaging for them.
And I also just want to ask as a follow-up question, wasn't that a political effect, not a cause of religion? Didn't the politicians decide on that and not the religious beliefs and practices?
It's a political effect, but much of the discrimination against LGBTQ plus individuals is fueled by religious prejudices.
They're making a correlation, not causation, based on the Don't Say Gay bill that the religion caused or helped it pass.
I would say that it was more of a facilitation. As with war, you can't say that religion is the only cause, but because there's many like beliefs that are anti-LGBTQ plus people, it contributes to those sort of political decisions.
I believe it's our question.
Yeah.
Does the affirmation agree with this following definition of religious practice, a term including practices and observations such as attending worship services, wearing religious garb or symbols?
Sorry, we have our own definition and I think we should use that one since we already stated it. It was, I mean,
Yeah, they're basically the same.
They're similar. Yeah, sure. So for our question,
Do you have a follow-up?
yeah, sorry.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Sure.
With this being, would you believe that the Crusades were a religious practice, as Pope Urban II said, shall wear the sign of the cross on the Lord on his forehead or his breast? Which goes,
No, sorry.
I would say that the Crusades weren't a religious practice, but they were like based in religion. Like they were impacting people who were of other religions, but I feel like it doesn't really talk about society today because I feel like the Crusades are, well, the Crusades, obviously they happened in the 1000s or in the 1200s or whatever. And that's obviously a very long time ago. And this kind of intense massacre and genocide of non-religious people does not necessarily happen in this magnitude today. And so I feel like it's not weighed as heavily as it as you believe it should be.
And I also just want to say that's correlation saying it caused the war or was something that they used as justification. Just saying because someone wore a cross or told people to wear a cross wasn't a religious belief and practice. That was just a normal everyday practice. And I believe that's the end of cross-sex. So yeah, and we'll probably take a little bit of prep time and we'll tell you when we start.
Prep time starting now. We took 45 seconds.
Oh, you know what? I think it's just, I'm just gonna sit down as well, actually, if that's okay. 2:35?
135.
Oh gosh, 1:35. Sorry. You know what? Okay, so our opponent's ready. Okay, then I will begin in 3, 2, 1. So for this debate, I just clearly want to go over the attacks they made on our case and why our case still stands, and then just reaffirm our attacks. So the first attack they made on our case applied to our second contention, and it was talking about peace, and they brought up how it can cause conflict, which is something that is a premeditative of peace. However, they didn't bring up the Tutsi people and genocide. And what I want to say to this is that my opponents need to be aware that the Tutsi people were an ethnic group, not a religious group, and unless they have definitions and actual evidence backing that up, I'd like my judge not to view that as valid. And so their attack on our second contention, false. And now for our first contention, the attack that they brought up on mental health was a few attacks on things such as people having in private schools, women were not allowed to still work as they were pregnant before marriage. However, that was a private school, and private schools are allowed to implement whatever they want, not based on society's impacts and selections. And so that wasn't effective of all society, only a private school, and it was only their decision. Also, that was one example, and in every single example in our case, we're talking about society as a whole. However, our opponents bring up multiple examples of the affecting individuals and wars such as the Crusades, and that was the only actual effect on society that they brought up. And also with the Crusades, I just want to implement the fact again that this was a human error. For human errors, just seeing people as lesser than them and automatically thinking that's a way to have conflict. I want to bring up an example of one person likes spoons and another one likes forks. They're obviously going to have conflict because they're different, and that's just something that's inherent in humans. And now for the attack that they made again on our second contention about the human rights progress, or no, about the peace, I just want to reaffirm that all of our contentions still stand because they never actually attacked a point. They just said that conflict was still there with religion, and so this peace wasn't affecting, it was just there. However, every single one of these pieces and the piece that happened and occurred is still effective in society, and it's affecting society to this day. I also want to bring up how in specific religious places and in protests, such as when Gandhi used his liberation in India, I want to bring up that specific example from the hrw.org. In South Asia, Hinduism was the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi's long march for the liberation of India. Since the occupation of Tibet by China in 1949 to 51, a religious figure, the Dalai Lama, has been guiding the Tibetan struggle for freedom, pushing for a democratic, self-governing Tibet in association with China. He was able to use his religious beliefs and practices to fuel peace and to fuel no conflict happening rather further. And as societies, we need to progress by stopping conflict, because conflict is going to happen no matter what. However, peace is something that is not apparent in society and is something that stems off from religion. For those reasons and many more, I urge a vote in the affirmation.
So I'm going to be taking some running prep starting now. So that was 51 seconds. So are my opponents ready? Are you guys ready? Okay, I will begin now. So I would like to be going over our definition of religious practice once again. So a term including practices and observations such as attending worship services, wearing religious garb or symbols, praying at described times, displaying religious objects, and adhering to certain dietary rules, refraining from certain activities. So with this being the St. Bartholomew Day Massacre should be considered a religious practice because he said that this war would have the support of God. He claims, "Let this be your war cry in combats because this word is given to you by God. When an armed attack is made upon the enemy, let this one cry be raised by all soldiers of God. It is the will of God, it is the will of God. Whoever shall determine upon this holy pilgrimage and shall make his vow to God, that effect, and shall offer himself to him as a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, shall wear the sign of the cross of the Lord on his forehead or on his breast." This being, the Pope Urban II said that this has the support of God, being a religious practice, as well as wearing a symbolic expression of this religion. So going on in my opponent's attack being made that these wars that aren't relevant enough, our resolution states on balance, which means with all things considered. Therefore, every war that has been caused by religion should be considered throughout this round. As well as my opponent's attack against the women being fired is not a relevant attack. Although from 2018, a former teacher at a private Catholic school in central Pennsylvania claimed she was fired from being pregnant and unmarried. The expectant mother who was due next summer was fired on November 30th. This is their beliefs and their moral code and what they believe, and I understand that, though she doesn't agree with it, Relch said, as she added that she misses her students. She was directly fired because of the religious belief and practices. This is still a very valid point, and it's still recent. So my opponent's attack on this does not stand. So my opponent's attack on our first subpoint on our first contention about the claim against homophobia, it's okay. So it doesn't matter because if it's not the intended portrayal and it's a human error, because people use this verse as a bias for their beliefs and a rationale for pursuing and exhibiting violence against recent portrayal. I would like to go over that there are many religious traumas that religions cause, and this harms mental health. Thank you.
I'm going to take the rest of prep time starting.
So I think what we need to say about whether contention falls is that the positive effects are exclusive to certain groups, like members of the LGBTQ+ communities, and those with religious trauma are part of society. And if we're considering on balance.
Sorry, you're unmuted. I just want to let you know.
Oh.
Just make sure
Okay,
to
that's
take with
all the
their
time. And then just to go down the flow, this is a 3-minute speech. I won't go over time again. And I'm first going to be talking about the why their contentions fall, why our contentions still stand, and then yeah. So is everybody ready? Okay, then first I'll begin right now. I'm first going to talk about their discrimination contention. They claim that female inequality is perpetuated by religion, but the two examples they brought up were about the firing of women and general female exclusion. As my partner said before, the firing of the pregnant woman was in a private school, and private schools are able to do what they want. They have more control over their own decisions and what they're going to do within their school. One clear example of this would be in times of segregation. The private schools were given complete authority over what they wanted to do, which is why we have private female education, like a boarding school for just all girls. So for these reasons, like they have a lot more power over their own legislation and the things that they can do within their schools. And so it's not necessarily an impact on society, it's more so an impact on an individual. And then I also wanted to talk about the other example that they brought up, which is under their subpoint, which is just about regular female exclusion. And they didn't really touch on this again, but female exclusion, like obviously, like I said before, feminism and female suffrage have increased in just, it's happened a lot, like it's becoming bigger and better more recently. I also want to talk about how they dropped our second contention. They didn't talk about the religious war specifically. We talked about how they didn't bring up their second contention, I think. And I also wanted to, just to go back to their second subpoint, or their first subpoint on the first contention, talking about homophobia. Despite the fact that homophobia still exists currently, including the Don't Say Gay bill, the Don't Say Gay bill was political, the Don't Say Gay bill was not a religious bill. And so the religion, even though they might have been motivated by their religion, if they didn't cite religion as a reason for putting the Don't Say Gay bill out there, it's not a religious bill. And then I also wanted to talk about, in no way is the affirmation saying that homophobia doesn't exist. It's just the fact that LGBTQ progress still happens despite the fact that these religious beliefs are in place of homophobia. And then moving on to the war argument, they talk about the St. Bartholomew Massacre and the Crusades, which happened a long time ago. But I also wanted to talk about how we read in my last speech that it's human nature to get into conflicts. And my partner used a great example of how if someone likes spoons and another person likes forks, they're going to get into conflict no matter what. And so it's not necessarily religion's fault that they get into a conflict. It's simply the fact that they are going to clash no matter what. And then I also want to talk about how our first point still stands, because declining mental health and religious trauma, the religion isn't weaponizing itself, people are weaponizing this religion. And so this ties back into the last point of how it's human nature to get into conflicts, it's human nature to weaponize religion, and it's human nature to hate on others. It's not religion's fault that people are hating other people, it's simply human nature. We also talked about how they dropped their second contention about how it saves societies in war times, like how mosques, churches, and other religious organizations are the first ones to help build pieces back up of the world after war. That's all the time I have.
Okay, so we're gonna take the rest of our prep too.
Which is 52 seconds.
All right, starting now.
That is time.
Okay, let me just get a timer up. Are you guys ready? All right. So I will be going over why my opponent's contentions fall and why ours still stand. And I would like to begin with their contention 1, subpoint A, where they talk about the positive effects of mental health. But the issue is that these are exclusive to certain groups. As we saw before, members of the LGBTQ community and those with religious trauma suffer and their mental health suffers, and they are a part of society. So we need to consider them too, because this is on balance, and they are not considering the negative effects that religion can also have on mental health. Moving on to their point about how anxiety and depression has physical impacts. This falls when we compare the physical impacts of genocide and hate crimes to the physical impacts of these mental issues. When you take it in balance, the killing of masses of people is a much larger physical impact. Moving on to their subpoint B, where they talk about religious efforts to halt ethnic cleansing. They didn't really address our point about the Rwandan genocide, because I had brought up in an earlier speech a piece of evidence from the Berkeley Center that said the church not only failed to protect human life, but witnessed its members playing an active role in the killing of the Tutsi people. So while this may have been an ethnic conflict, there were religious components that led to some of the killing. So they didn't adequately refute our point on that, and it still stands. Moving on to their second contention about peace and war, although they say that although they're saying that we dropped this point, I don't really believe that we did. We addressed all the wars and genocides that result from religion. So while they talk about how we can help to build back up, it starts at the core with religion facilitating and causing conflict. Religion is causing a lot of conflict, and I had brought up that piece of evidence about how religion is a significant factor in the facilitation of war. Moving on to my own contentions, our contention 1 still stands because they didn't adequately refute the fact that LGBTQ plus people decline in mental health as a result of religious beliefs and practices, and they didn't really adequately refute the religious traumas, although they contended that these are impacting individuals, and as with the women point, it's impacting individuals. These individuals are part of society, and we need to look at it on balance, and society includes the individuals. With our second contention, they said that it was human error, but I don't think a spoon fork comparison adequately demonstrates the complexities of war. For these reasons, I urge a vote in the affirmative. I can see no other vote than that in the affirmative. Negative. I'm sorry. Oops.
Okay, good debate, guys. Is that the last speech?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good debate.
And the recording.